It's called Windswept House. Windswept House by Malachi Martin. Many of you might remember the name Malachi Martin. He wrote the book Keys of This Blood, and it does mention in that book Seventh-day Adventist and Keys of This Blood. But they were vehemently against this book. And so because they were vehemently against this book, you know what I decided? I need to have this book. So I got on the phone, stopped at the rest stop, I called, and I called my associate, and I said, listen, get on the internet, look at Amazon.com, somewhere, try to find this book for me. He was able to find the book. And this is what was inside the cover of the leaf of the book when I got that. It said, Martin was asked if he feared for his life since writing this book. Martin said he did, but that he was too old to change his ways since then. Martin died under very suspicious circumstances. He was found unconscious and bleeding in his home with hardwood fragments embedded into his skull. He was taken to the hospital and eventually woke up from his coma for an instant and said it was a murder attempt, but he did not get a chance to see who did it. Then he fell back into his coma, received the sacrament of extreme unction, and died. Very mysterious death of Malachi Martin, who wrote a book that the Catholic Church was vehemently against and opposed to. I found that quite interesting. Back to Catholic Power versus American Freedom, page 168 and 169. The most influential of all the early Catholic leaders is Paul Weyrich. It was Weyrich together with Ed McAteer and Howard Phillips who spent a day with Jerry Falwell, persuading him to take up the issue of abortion. Paul Weyrich and Howard Phillips spent countless hours with electronic ministries like Jerry Falwell, James Robertson, Pat Robertson, urging them to get involved in conservative politics. It seems clear that Jerry Falwell's moral majority, Pat Robertson's Christian coalition, would not have been organized if the Vatican, through its agents, the American bishops, had not decided it was necessary to involve articulate right-wing Protestant leaders. Isn't that interesting? That it was Catholic bishops that encouraged these men, Protestants, to start their ministries. I find it quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen, to see what's going on. What is going on in Washington? RNC, Republican National Committee officials decided to honor a Roman Catholic priest from Chicago with a reception at St. Peter's Church in Capitol Hill last night. We discussed this a little bit last night in yesterday's meeting. The RNC, which launched a Catholic task force last September, has intensified its outreach to Catholics, it goes on to say. We're communicating the way we've been voting for the past 5 years, Poltz said. Since we took the majority in 1995, we've had a 100% Catholic voting record, and the Democrats have been on the wrong side of the issue. They said, it's become more and more obvious that they're admitting they made a mistake, and they're overreaching, doing Catholic resolutions, Catholic masses, Catholic legislation almost on a daily basis, said Representative Timothy Romer of Indiana. Have they infiltrated into the political system? Yes. Have they infiltrated into the right-wing system of Protestantism, so-called? Yes. Or we see that the rug is being pulled out from under us? I think we should by now, because it won't be long. It'll be too late if you don't recognize it in the very near future and do something about it. It is a very appropriate traditional Catholic thing to do, said lady who served as ambassador to the Vatican. Weyrich wrote that he recently asked senior Bush advisor Karl Rove to tell the president that he has mastered the art of Catholic governments. Rove, according to Weyrich, replied, that's pretty good for a Methodist. Ladies and gentlemen, John Wesley would roll over in his grave. He would roll over in his grave. The National Committee members of the Catholic Campaign of America are longtime associates of Pat Robertson. In addition, the Catholic organizations often operate with groups such as Family Research Council, the Christian Coalition, Operation Rescue, and yes, Focus on the Family, and the traditional values of coalition. Father Richard Newhouse convicted Watergate conspirator Chuck Colson and others signed and endorsed evangelicals and Catholics together. The Christian Coalition launched the Catholic Alliance in 1995 because Catholics already make up 16.3% of the Christian Coalition's 1.6 million members. Protestant Catholics claiming unity on belief of all such things as justification by faith alone. Through some of the more official than others, all these statements make the same basic claim, which is that both preach and both teach the same gospel message. And we're told by the pen of inspiration, the Roman Church has not changed. So who's doing all the changing? It's the so-called Protestant religions and the Protestant ministries. It's the best picture I could get. This is Martin Luther, a true Protestant. What did Martin Luther have to say? Great Controversy, page 125. Quote, "No one can imagine," he wrote, "what sins and infamous actions are committed in Rome. They must be seen and heard to be believed. Thus they are in the habit of saying, if there is a hell, Rome is built over it. It is the abyss whence issues every kind of sin. If there's a hell," he said, "Rome is built right over it." He goes on to say in page 142, "Already I feel greater liberty in my heart, for at last I know that the Pope is the Antichrist, and that his throne is that of" what? Satan himself. Protestant. We get nervous when we start preaching the three angels' messages. Oh, you think we should do that? We think we should do that? Yes, I think we should do that, ladies and gentlemen. That is the everlasting gospel that must go to the world. We are commanded to give that message. And the gospel is good news. Good news to the oppressed. Bad news to the oppressors. I said formerly that the Pope was Christ's vicar. Now I assert that he is our Lord's adversary and the devil's apostle. Again, back to Catholic Power, page 172, 173. Pope John Paul II explicitly intervened in the American political process on March the 26th of 1995 with a papal encyclical, Evangelism, requiring the obedience of Roman Catholic voters, legislators, and judges. In other words, if you're Roman Catholic and you happen to be a politician, you better follow what they have to say. If you're a judge, you better rule the way they want you to rule. And if you're in the church, you better do what they say to do, or you can be excommunicated. You might not be able to participate in the Mass, which means eternal loss. And we're seeing them threatening that, politicians today. The Pope also insisted that his authority to interpret what is moral must be placed ahead of the democratic judgments of people whose interpretations of the will of God differs from his. See, he believes he's infallible. And if the church believes they're infallible, and when they give these things, then no man has the right to say or do otherwise. He specifically stated, democracy cannot be idolized to the point of making it a substitute for morality. In the 1996 presidential election, candidate Robert Dole made a major speech to the Catholic Press Association, an annual convention. Though not a Catholic, quote, "I would listen to the Pope John Paul II. Though not a Catholic, he said, "I will listen to the Pope if you elect me." If you elect me. Washington Times. We shared this again. I go into churches all over. How many people have you knew that your Congress voted 416 to 1 to give the Vatican a stronger voice, the United Nations? Very few, if any, hands go up. To be forewarned is to be forearmed, ladies and gentlemen. We need to see the signs of the times. If anything, Representative Christopher Smith of New Jersey said, Republican sponsor of the resolution, the Holy See deserves a more prominent, and he has received the Illustrated Great Controversy. The Lord allowed me to place it into his hands. Pray that this man will read it. So they give more of a role to the prelate of Rome, to the head of Rome.